Praise the Lord, guys. I'm Straw Greenhorn. And in those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples unto him and said unto them, I have compassion on the multitude. They have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I shall send them away to their own houses fasting, they shall faint in the way, for divers of them came from far away. The disciples said, When shall a man find bread in this wilderness to satisfy such great a number of men? Jesus said, How many loaves have ye? And they say, 7. He commanded the people to sit down on the grass. He took the loaves, blessed, brake, and gave thanks, and gave to the disciples to set before the people, and they did set them before the people. Now there were also a few small fishes, and he took and blessed, and commanded them to be set before the people. Now they did all eat and were filled, and took up of fragments in the remaining 7 baskets. Now they that had eaten were about 4,000 men, and then he sent them away. So here's the second, feeding of the multitude with the fishes and the loaves. We see a similar pattern here, a multitude being there and Jesus having compassion on them. And that's really the beginning and basis of, his ministry is compassion. Why did he heal the blind? Because he understands what it must have been like to be blind, having somebody to need to lead you around and being a burden to people. That's what he saw. I think that, some ministers fail because they see the glory of the thing. That people will say that, oh, so and so minister healed me and I was able to get my sight. And they miss putting themselves in that other person's shoe. And Jesus, he was all about that. So in both, we see him having compassion on them. We don't ever see him taking up an offering, but we know that there was a money bag because Judas kept it. We see a lot of ministers, they lead with this asking for the offering. Some ministers, they have a base fee. If you don't pay them a certain amount, they won't come. For these people, it's like, what did he say about the scribes and Pharisees when they fast and they disfigure their faces to appear unto men to fast, so that men will say unto them, oh, you're fasting, oh, you're so diligent, you're so spiritual, and you really must take this walk seriously, for men to say good things unto them. What did the Bible say? That they have their reward. If you demanded a fee and they had to give you that fee, then why lookest thou for a reward? We don't ever see Jesus taking up an offering. But they did have needs. But we saw where when it was time to pay taxes, he took it from the fish's mouth. So compassion is the first thing we see. And then him testing the disciples to see what they think that should have been done. But here's a little different, because here's the second time that we're out and about and there's not enough, bread or not anything to feed the people. But they saw the first time what he did when he fed them with the fishes and the loaves. So now here they are dumbfounded, not knowing what to do, asking him a question. Where shall a man? The same question they asked the first time. You see, if they were at least paying attention to their own words, they could have gotten the answer, because they asked the same question. Where shall we get, bread to satisfy such a great multitude? The first time they said, shall we go and buy 200 penny worth of bread? They didn't say that this time, but the question that they asked, it will make you understand that they were not, walking in faith. Whence shall a man find bread to satisfy this great multitude in the wilderness, making it a power of force and might and strength. God said, not by power nor by might, but by his spirit. A lot of times we look at things in life as a test and measure of strength. It's like an arm wrestling match. If we can force our way through it, if we can burst through it, oftentimes violence, if we can violence our way through things, then that's what's going to make it work out. 1 plus 1 is not 2 with God. 1 plus 1 is whatever he says. 1 plus 1 is manna raining from the sky right then and there, just like he did for Israel in the wilderness. 1 plus 1 is Mary and Martha having prepared with all the women, and here they come. 1 plus 1 is him sending quails like he did for Israel. It is often said that God, lives in eternity, and none of us have been in eternity except, when before we first came here, and I'm pretty sure nobody remembers what that was like. So when we try and describe, his environment, we run into trouble and we shortchange ourselves and we limit him, because it's like trying to describe what room that God lives in eternity. You're trying to describe, what color the table is, what color the bedspread is, what color the TV is, how the carpet or the rug looks like, what color the walls are, and you're making all kind of assumptions. So when we do things like that, we limit God. And on a general note, I did this in my last video about the fishes and the loaves. If we were to compare the starting and ending point of both, we would see that he did more with less. First time around, it was 5 loaves, 2 fishes, 5,000 men, took up 12 baskets. This time around, 7 loaves. It didn't count the fishes. 4,000 men, but it took up only 7 baskets. So we'll see that the first one, it was 5,000 men more. This one is 4,000. So you think that it would be harder to feed 5,000, right? First time around, it was 5 loaves of bread. This time around, it's 7. So We have more men at first with less bread. So you think that we should be able to do less with that, right? But the first time we took up 12 baskets, this time we only took up 7. So he did more with less, feeding more people. So, compassion, we see his compassion is explained here. We know he knows all things, right? So he can give certain answers. He can give finite answers to things, to questions. But, looking at, these people, he knew that some of them came from very far away just to see and hear him. They had been with him 3 days and were hungry, had nothing to eat. He was thinking of the distance that they would have to walk. Everybody that came, they got their healing. But, if you were elderly, you were still elderly, right? He never did anything he did that wasn't based on compassion. The man by the pool of Bethsaida, where the angel troubled the waters, and whosoever was the first to step in, they would be healed. Now, he saw this man there. He had been there 38 years. I'm pretty sure that was longer than anybody else that was there. And it's him that he went to. Will thou be made whole? The man started to explain the situation. Sir, he called him sir. I have no man to put me in the water. But when I go to step in, another step in before me, and he is healed. But Jesus, he didn't hold it against him. We see him, when they take up the fragments, the baskets, the 7 baskets. Notice it said of fragments. I already explained this, that we know that he said that I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Him feeding them with the loaves, it hasn't happened yet, but when he'll say that unless you drink of my blood and eat of my flesh, you have no part in me. So he's metaphorically feeding them with his flesh here. And remember, he was wounded for our transgression. He was bruised for our iniquities. All the pieces of fragments that were taken up, they were all broken. There were no whole pieces. Because his body, at the Last Supper, when he gave communion, he said, when he took the bread, he said, this is my body, which is broken for you. All right, so let's get into the scriptures. It starts out saying, and in those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples unto him and said unto them. So now we just came from Tyre and Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, into the midst of the coast of Decapolis. And the last thing we saw him do was when he healed the man that was both deaf and had the speech impediment, and he straightly charged them that they should tell no man, and I explained that usually it's because this will draw an unnecessary crowd and it will create problems. It would restrict where he is able to go. It would make, the journey for others even that much more difficult. The multitude being very great, them coming from, as we're about to see here, some from very far away. And, one thing led to another. And here we have all these people. So now they had been with him 3 days. So now it doesn't specify how the food situation was on the first 2 days. So now here we are on the third. Was there food on the first 2? Did, people probably, they had, a little thing here and there to eat. But, it's going to run out. Because I'm sure, they had, they walked in those days. If they carried an animal, then, they could carry that much more. But, surely they weren't expecting to stay for 3 days. I guarantee you that much. So they have nothing to eat. Here's the compassion. When we, observe Jesus, we see that, he's not limited in his thinking. He's not befuddled by the problem in front of him. And not only is he not befuddled, but he's able to, maintain, all pieces of the picture, all pieces of the picture, and to have clear view of everything. Because here he is thinking about that they have nothing, they ate nothing, and that they might faint in the way. He's considering all things. How many ministers would have forgotten that the people need food? How many ministers would have even considered that some came from far? And whatever these people might be facing, whatever they might be dealing with, some they can barely see the people in front of them, much less put themselves in their shoes and see what they're dealing with. So the multitude being very great. And I like to say that all these people, they're not all people needing healings. A lot of them are those that got healed and what they were looking for, and they just keep coming back, to hear the words of life, to hear his wisdom and his teachings, to witness others be healed. This was the most exciting place that anyone could be, at any given point. In his presence, observing him do all these things that he does. So in those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, was this why he told these last guys, don't go out and publish it abroad? Because he's going to get to everyone, and he is going to get to everyone. And the Bible says, line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, right? But with this, they came in all at once. Maybe he wanted to give more individual attention. If when a teacher is teaching a class, whether it be high school, college, they always try to aim for a certain teacher to student ratio, because then if it's too great, then teacher having to deal with so many things, they can't give the specialized attention to the students that they will need. And if you've ever been in a huge class, then you'll see that you're there and you just gotta catch notes, as it comes. And it feels like a rat race. It's so impersonal. When you're done that class, the teacher might not even know the majority of the student's name. All right, so the next one it says, I have compassion on the people, for they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. So imagine this. When Jesus is teaching, as he's saying everything, he's looking on the people. And these are the kind of thoughts that he has, towards it. He said, for I know the thoughts I have towards you, thoughts of peace, not of evil, to give you an expected end. Whenever there's a break and he's standing around, this is what's going through his mind. These are the kind of thoughts that he's having. I think we lose so much of our compassion when we focus on religion. Yeah, there are certain things that should and should not be done. But then, when mounting off rules takes the place of compassion and we see an absence of compassion, yeah, that's when we know we've taken a wrong turn. So he said he called the disciples unto him. He didn't want to say it out loud. I have compassion on the people. They have been with me now 3 days and have no bread to eat. And like I said, it does not comment on the first 2 days what was happening. Was there absolutely no bread for these 2 days? Did the people eat what they had in these first 2 days? In the wilderness, Moses was up in the mountain with God 40 days and 40 nights. It does not speak of him eating. Did God feed him? Was being in the presence of God, because we know that when he came down, his face shone, right? So much so that they had to put a veil because his skin was so bright. If you were to look at this moment and even all the other moments, everything that he did, and to try and decode, there's so much information that, oftentimes we skip over things. And because, the human mind, sometimes it has a hunger for shortcuts. We want to know the least amount that's necessary and what's the shortest way to complete this least amount. Because things they take, energy, and it takes time. It takes, wrestling with the issues. If you're showing up and you're saying, well, let me just get this done quick as soon as possible, and then I'll be gone. But it takes energy and time, and human beings, we fall into routines sometimes more willingly than others. And when we get into routines, we miss the beauty of the moment. We miss, all the different lines of text, coming in. Because in this moment of compassion, we already saw, I guarantee you at this point, that everybody had gotten, all the things that, he could give to them. All their issues got resolved. But yes, so here he is finding another. That's why the Bible says, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness. Because you see, while you are there seeking, he's looking at you like this. Things that you don't even know that could be addressed. Things you don't even know could be fixed. Things you don't even know that you're lacking. Things you can't even imagine. You're coming onto him saying, Lord, maybe I need a better job. Please heal my family, protect us. When he's looking to make a great name for you, for your family, for generations. He's thinking like, imagine the house that you live in. Him just coming and taking you from that and bringing you into a bigger house, a way bigger, furnished with everything you could ever need. He's like, don't even take your clothes, not even the clothes I want you to take. The food that's in the fridge, leave that. All the computers, the laptops, leave those too. Leave the TVs, leave the couches and the sofas, leave everything. Because I really don't even like you having these things. And he just puts you somewhere. I mean, not necessarily literally, but metaphorically. Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, I shall give you rest. But like, seek ye first, and then shall these things come unto you. Because if you're not seeking, then you're maybe not in his presence, right? And that's what seeking is, being in his presence. How's he gonna look at you if you're not in his presence? But then you can't come in his presence and just stand around, right? No, you're seeking. Seeking is what you do in his presence. And while you're there seeking, he's there fixing. So in the next one it says, and if I shall send them away to their houses fasting, they shall faint in the way, for divers of them came from far place. So Jesus was a good host. Sometimes we get in people's presence and it was really an old day kind of thing. The old times. When Lot saw the angels from Sodom in Sodom and Gomorrah, he didn't know they were angels. He brought them in the house. He washed their feet. He gave them food. Same thing with Abraham when he first saw the angels, which was before he even left with Lot. When David was called to play the harp, for Saul when he was being tormented by that evil spirit, his father, David's father, sent him with a kid and bread and wine for the king. This kind of hospitality of giving of gifts, even small gifts. It was really, a thing. As time has passed, we have declined in morality and we've declined in things like these. So Jesus, he was a good host. He's saying that there's no way, I can send these people away hungry because that's my name. My name is on that. I can't do that. Because imagine, they did get some great healing, right? Imagine being blind and now you can see For the blind man who can now see, I don't care if you sent him away hungry for 100 days, he would be so happy. But being a good host, if I send them away fasting, they shall faint in the way, for they came from far. Then we see the disciples answer, say, whence shall a man find bread in the wilderness to satisfy these men? Looking at the number of men and how much it will cost. Ready to say 200 pennyworth again. I don't know, maybe they might need less this time because this is only 4,000 men and not 5,000. But where's the memory of the fishes and the loaves the last time? Did they just completely forget that? This teaches us, a lesson that, when God has done great things for us, how we can sometimes just forget. This is what's happening right here. I forget which miracle it was. It was said that, because they had forgotten the fishes and the loaves, for their heart was hardened. The Bible described it as their heart being hardened. I forget what miracle it was. He was about to do something, and this was what was used to highlight the fact that their heart was hardened. So here he is, the heart still being hardened. So they're trying to, rectify the situation with carnal thinking. Are we gonna have to go and buy all these people food? Are we gonna have to find someone to cook it? How are we gonna bring it back? We're gonna need a lot of donkeys and stuff like that. One of the greatest things we see God do is in the regeneration, and there came a new heaven and a new earth, for the old ones had passed away. It's because of things like this. We know that sin had corrupted everything. So God in his wisdom and understanding, he will give us a new heaven and a new earth. But it's also for things like this, so that we don't bring our preconceived notions and limitations into this new heaven and new earth. Because if you've never seen this new heaven and new earth, what are you gonna bring, from whence shall a man satisfy this multitude with bread? How shall we do this? How shall we light the city? How shall we feed the people? How shall we build houses? How shall everything is new? So they didn't, if they were thinking, they would have said, or okay, so should we just go and see how many fishes and loaves they have and we can do it again? But then again, I find that, you don't try and lead God, because he's going to take you, the more you try and lead God, the more he's going to take you away that you don't know. Because in a video yesterday, when they brought the man that was, deaf and dumb, impediment in his speech, they said, lay your hands on him and heal him, please. That's what they pretty much said unto him. And he did something completely different that we hadn't seen before. So if they were to go and say, well, should we go and get, see how many loaves and fishes we have, I don't know what he would have done, but he would have switched it up and did something different. So then he said, how many loaves have ye? And they say 7. So after, going and seeing, they saw 7 loaves, so more than the 5 from last time. And then he says he commanded them to tell the people to sit down on the grass. He took the loaves, blessed, break, gave thanks, and gave the disciples to set before the people, and they set them before the people. So giving thanks unto God and everything that he does, always acknowledging the Father. And because, God has blessed us with such great, intelligence and talents and all these things, but yet still, we can do nothing without him. Bible says that unless the Lord watches the city, the watchman watches in vain. Unless the Lord builds the city, the laborers labor in vain. Notice that he always does the bread first. Whether it be communion or the fishes and the loaves, it's always the bread first. That might show you why the devil, when he came in the wilderness, that's the first thing that he tried to tempt him. Command these stones be made bread. If you understand, when the devil, he did this, he was trying to create religion, because I guess he somehow, knew that the bread came first. But then he was like, command these stones be made bread. Jesus, he showed them the true answer to these things. We don't live by these things, but we live by God, what God says. I was speaking earlier about, religion and compassion. Because you see, the devil, he does corrupt everything. And then when he's done, he's gonna accuse you of breaking the very thing that he created. Because now, what was supposed to happen? This was supposed to take root with Jesus. So then now, if he was to ever put the bread second, then he would accuse him. He would accuse Jesus of the rule that he created. And that's religion. The devil comes in, he takes some things, then he says, oh, it has to always be this way and it can't be no other way. And this is what it means. And he puts his meanings to things. And then you see, when you break, these things that he created and he says, then he accuses you. And that's what religion is. It's the very laws of God, or the statutes of God, have been twisted to give it, an unnecessary meaning. And then now these things, they take precedence. But Jesus was saying here, it doesn't matter if the bread comes first or last, but we honor God. That was his answer. We honor God. Whatever you want to come and say about the bread, Because knowing this devil, if he was to come and find one piece of bread that wasn't broken, accusation right there. You see, you were supposed to break all the pieces. And you see that? You didn't. So religion really is God's statutes and it's God's laws, right? But the devil, he has infiltrated and he has given things his own meaning. And then now, if you break these things, then, it comes accusation. So then these things are reinforced, by negative rewards and punishments. All right, so in the next one it says, and there were a few small fishes also, and he took those and blessed and commanded them to be set before the people. In the first fishes and the loaves encounter, I noticed that, when he referred to the fishes, there was a more sense of urgency, and I was able to say that using the command these stones be made bread, we go from there to where he says, which father having a son asking bread would give him a stone, or asking a fish would give him a serpent, or an egg would give him a scorpion. So I was able to say that the bread was opposite to the stone, so then the fish is opposite to the serpent. And why such care was given was because we want to call that the limiting factor. In enzyme reactions, there's usually a bunch of reactions going on at the same time. But the overall thing, it can only go as fast as the slowest one. So even if the rest of them are complete, it still has to wait for the last one, the slowest one. Because it doesn't matter how badly Jesus' body was broken. The reason we fell was because of the serpent. And if the concept of the serpent, what he did, not saying the serpent himself, but the concept of what he was able to do, if that should rise again, then the breaking of the bread, the body, was in vain. But, I don't really get the same sense of urgency in this text here. But, like I always say, each book and each verse is meant to stress something. So maybe it was stressed in that text. So now here we're focusing on something else. All right, so the next one it says, and they did all eat and were filled, and took up of broken fragments 7 baskets full. So whatever plan they would have come up with, plan of God was way better. And it's always like that, when it comes to the things of God. Because 4,000 men, how much money did these people have on them, and what would they have been able to buy? Whatever place they would buy food from, what would they have been able to produce? When I compared the last one, I said, do you know any place that has food to feed 4 or 5,000 people? Even if they were to use everything they had, would they have been able to feed such a great number? Even if you could pay for it, even if they were to use everything they had, maybe each person would get like a mouthful, like one bite. But with this, they were all able to eat and took up 7 baskets. So the first one we saw 12, now we see only 7. So just like with Gideon, when the battle was about to go, the Lord said to Gideon, you have too many men with you for me to give the battle into your hands. That's when he took them down to the brook. And then there was a test, when he made them all drink. And whosoever would drink a certain way, then they were selected. But first he told them, anyone that's fearful, or having any apprehensions, you're free to go. And 30,000 men, I believe it was, became 300. For anybody that does optometry, remember it was God who created the light. When he saw the light, he said, let there be light. God, he said, let there be light. Now, in the wisdom and intellect of God, he created all these, calculations. That's why we're able to study these things. Physics and biology, chemistry, the physical world. If you're a optometrists, when they study sight, when you go and get your glasses or your contacts, the image, it gives off light. And then, your lens, it bends it and focuses it, on the optic nerve, which takes it to the brain. But, if when you look at it, you'll see that there's a point where they each cross. So if it's coming from the left, it crosses over to the right. If it's coming from the right, it crosses over to the left. And things are, inverted. We actually see things upside down. It's the brain that fixes it so that we see it the way it is. The raw image is upside down, I believe, if I remember correctly. And this could maybe explain what is happening right here. Because, like I said, things, they cross over. Just like with Gideon, remember, it was God that created these calculations, right? And they are real, they do exist. So even, Gideon having that much men, when it crossed at that point with God, it would equal to something so small, right? But then, when he has a little bit, when that crosses, and it becomes, inverted, upside down, and, right becomes left and left becomes right, then all of a sudden, but then, even to say that, God is that, even that would be limiting him. But, maybe that's one, explanation if you want to get really technical. So then the last one, it says, those that had eaten were about 4,000 men. And then he sent them away. If there was something else that needed to be addressed, he would have addressed it before sending them away. With God, you come as you are, but you'll never leave as you came. I am Straw Greenhorn.